Earlier this year, Digital Eclipse resurrected the Wizardry series with a ground-up remake of the original game, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. While the remake maintains the hardcore dungeon-crawling gameplay of the 1981 version from the Apple II, it introduces smart modernizations to make it more approachable and accessible to modern players. Some of these are pretty obvious, like the entirely new 3D graphics engine. Other changes are more subtle and optional, such as changes to the way the map system works or the way that characters can level up. However, one of the biggest changes to this new remake is that there's an all-new soundtrack. Now, depending on the version of Wizardry that you've played, that might not sound like that big of a change, but the original version on the Apple II had no soundtrack. In fact, the only sound effect in that game was heard when your party of adventurers ran into a solid brick wall. Since Digital Eclipse's plan was to bring the Apple II version to the masses, the inclusion of a soundtrack makes for a pretty big change. And it raises a question: how do you create a soundtrack for one of the most important games of all time when the original had no music at all? To find out, I thought who better to ask than the composer of the remake soundtrack herself, Winifred Phillips.
Hi, my name is Winifred Phillips, and I'm a video game composer. I started in the industry with my first project, God of War, and I've been full steam ever since. I've worked on a lot of the franchises you might know, like A Little Big Planet, Assassin's Creed, Total War, Lineage, Jurassic World. My latest project is Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, and I'm just really excited to be talking to you about what I've been doing.
Winifred's career began in radio, where she composed music for Radio Tales, a serialized drama show that adapted classic sci-fi, fantasy, and horror novels into radio plays. The show ran from 1996 to 2008, and in that time, Winifred composed music for hundreds of episodes that aired on NPR and SiriusXM. Her soundtracks helped bring celebrated works like Dracula and Beowulf alive for a radio audience. However, as the show was wrapping up, she had a sudden spark of inspiration that would lead to a new chapter of her career.
So I'd always been a gamer, but I'd never really connected the idea of my hobby with what I did as a profession until after Radio Tales started winding up. And I think maybe the nature of the projects in Radio Tales, the kind of stories it was telling, connected with the kind of stories I was experiencing as a video gamer. I remember I was playing a Tomb Raider, and I guess the light bulb just went off over my head during that. And I just started thinking about creating music for games. So I started going after it. I just happened to reach out to Sony at the right time. They were looking to build a team of composers for the original God of War. And they were interested in working with me because I had some experience with creating choral works and vocal works. I'm a classically trained vocalist, so I sing in a lot of my projects. And that was something that they wanted to hear as a part of my music for God of War. I was the singing voice of the Siren mini-boss character in God of War, which was a lot of fun for me to do. But that was my very first project as a game composer. And it was a fantastic way to start in a new career path.
Were you familiar with Wizardry before you got started? Like, how did you get involved with the project? What was your understanding of Wizardry as a franchise prior to it?
I was approached by Digital Eclipse about Wizardry, and the title rang huge bells with me. It's like, wow, this is one of those foundational titles in the history of video gaming. I mean, it's an amazing story, really. Just a couple of Cornell University students in the 80s making this game that became so important. It established a genre and had a huge impact on party-based role-playing games and dungeon crawlers, and just took its place as an informative and guiding influence on so many developers that came after. So that was really exciting to be invited to create music for that.
Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord first launched on the Apple II back in 1981. As I said at the intro, the original version did not have music. However, many of its subsequent ports to other consoles and systems did feature soundtracks, the most notable and well-known being the Nintendo Entertainment System version composed by Kentaro Haneda. Interestingly enough, the early access version of Digital Eclipse's Remake even featured orchestrated arrangements of the Nintendo version's OST, but the 1.0 release, that launched on May 23rd for consoles and PC, features an entirely new soundtrack, aside from an homage at the title screen to the Nintendo version. I was curious how Winifred and the rest of the development team came to that decision, and how this new version of the soundtrack came to be.
The Digital Eclipse folks are really fastidious and meticulous about being true to the original vision of what they were adapting. And of course, that was the 1981 version of the game for the Apple II. So that was what was guiding them. And so it had to guide me too. But it was a holistic approach. We looked at everything and the way in which the gaming community embraces and understands Wizardry. I mean, most people do have an awareness of the Nintendo version of Wizardry. So it's not as if ignoring the way people perceive a game would be the best route to serve their nostalgia for it. I mean, I was aware of the musical score for the Nintendo version, and I definitely took a look at it, and you'll notice that there is one piece of music in the splash screen that's an adaptation from the Nintendo version of the game. It's kind of a hat tip to that version of the game, kind of a gesture to the fans who would recognize it and kind of get a bit of nostalgia from that. Then moving into the actual music for the game, we really wanted it to have its own identity and to be something that would serve the original vision of the game. One of the things that's fun when I was doing the research for this project was reading through the original manual that came with Wizardry when it was first released. Isn't it amazing when they had manuals, and this one was so much. This one was so much fun. And they have a story, like a short story of like an example set of characters and what their experience would have been like, and it gives you a sense of the narrative flow of it and the vision of the original designers of what they were telling, of the story they were telling with Wizardry. So I wanted to keep with that feel, and it was heavily influenced by tabletop role-playing games and that sort of medieval fantasy style and genre. So I dug into research of medieval musical forms and that kind of courtly flair that would put players in a time and a location and an aesthetic that would feel good for what Wizardry is supposed to be. I think one of the things I'm proudest of is the suite of medieval tunes that you experience in the above ground. The structure of gameplay when you're going through those particular areas of the game, it needed to have that kind of musical differentiation that would help the imagination to fill in the blanks. I mean, we're still building on that code from the Apple II version, so you're still looking at essentially a hierarchy of menus. But behind that is the idea of an adventure, and that includes a lot of different places and things that you would do there, going into the tavern and meeting up with prospective party members, or shopping at the trading post. Working up your skills at the training grounds. It was so important to nail that RPG aesthetic in order for Wizardry to feel like Wizardry.
While the collection of melodies found in the above-ground town are certainly the first impression players get of Wizardry and its new OST, the true identity of the gameplay and its new soundtrack are fully revealed once you first step foot in the dungeon. So it's no surprise that that is where Winifred spent the most time and ran into the most challenges while writing the game's music.
Strangely, I think there is a little bit of a dichotomy in terms of the musical style that I pursued with Wizardry. When you are out of the maze, the music has a very historical flair. It feels rooted in a time and place. When you go into the maze, it diverges and becomes a bit more dissonant and experimental. It's suspenseful. It has a more cinematic structure in terms of creating suspense. So that was really important to me in order to create that sense of urgency and peril that all the time, because that really is at the heart of the maze, of your emotional experience in the maze, getting lost in the maze, getting attacked in the maze, never know what is going to happen around each corner in the maze as you moved along. So it was slow to compose. You couldn't really think of it as in terms of the way you would write a story. You just jot out an outline and then create the story itself. This was not a linear tale, essentially. It was a series of vignettes, if that makes more sense. And each one had to stand alone but work well with all the others. So it felt unintuitive in that respect. As composers, we tend to think of music in terms of traditional compositional structure, themes that repeat, bridges and choruses and those kinds of musical elements that tie music together and make it satisfying to listen to. And the dungeon music had none of that because it wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to make you feel uneasy constantly. So it didn't resolve. It didn't include melodies that you could hang your mental hat on, so to speak. It wasn't about a thematic approach. It was all about moments and emotional colors, and so that was more difficult to create. It took longer and it was challenging, but it was something that the dungeon really called for. I mean, really, this game is all about that dungeon. That's the heart of Wizardry. The character of the dungeon is everything. And in the original game, the dungeon was a wireframe. What they were seeing on the screen was essentially a kind of like a sketch, and they were creating the painting for themselves. And I wanted the music to help in the creation of that painting, and to the sense that there is more going on than what we see, and that our own internal journey through the maze is richer and more diverse than even what the game is giving us, and to make sure that it moved as much as possible so that it felt full of danger and suspense and peril and colors of emotion that would support whatever the player was feeling or whatever they might be creating, the story they might be weaving in their own minds. So that was part of what made those tracks hard to do. I worked on some larger scale games like the Assassin's Creed stuff, the God of War project, things like that, where it's more of a wide open structure. You're dealing with music that you experience and then leave behind you a lot more. And with Wizardry, the music of the dungeon was going to be at your side the whole time. The last thing you want music to do is wear out its welcome. It needs to support gameplay. And as a composer, I'm aware of that, particularly if I know that the music is going to be with you for a while. So I would say that because the scope of the game is a bit smaller, just structurally, just because it was designed in the 1980s, the music really needed to be on point. It couldn't have any weak spots. So it was something that I was really aware of in the work. And I am very pleased that people are responding so well to this music, that it's something that they're enjoying, because particularly given those challenges.
If Wizardry has 3 gameplay pillars, one being the town, the other being the dungeon, the third is combat. For as much time as you spend exploring the dungeon, you spend almost that same amount of time fighting in the dungeon. So creating compelling combat music was of course another important goal for this new soundtrack. And it's here that Winifred found some novel ways to tie back into the entire decade-spanning history of the Wizardry franchise. And if you listen closely, you just might catch them too.
with the combat music, particularly the combat music that is towards the end of the game when you're fighting the final boss. It's a choral track, and so I was able to kind of give a sense of the history of wizardry. In that particular piece of music, I used the spell names from the Wizard spellbook as the lyrics for that choral piece, and so that made it fun. And it pulled it together with the essentially the mythos of the game. And one of the things that was fun about it is that the list of wizard spells in this game tend to end in open vowels. So I'm as a composer looking at it, I'm like, oh, party. There were a lot of opportunities to create great moments with those spell names, and it was a great structure to hang that song on.
The Wizardry remake launched back in May, after almost 8 months of early access. But in many ways, this is something fans have been waiting for decades. And Winifred and the rest of the team behind the game certainly felt the pressure to deliver something that lived up to its legacy and brought it forward in a respectful but approachable way.
I felt like a sense of responsibility because I knew there was going to be an audience with a deep love for the original game that was going to be coming to this game with so much nostalgia and enthusiasm. So it did feel like there was a certain weight to accepting a job like this. It really means a lot that in the reviews and feedback, they've really been enjoying the music, and it's been working for their experience in the game. That's meant a lot to me. I'm really excited that we were able to offer the official soundtrack album for this game for free. It's something that we wanted to do because there's a gratitude that we feel for the support of this fan community. They've been with the game since early access, which was a long time, and supporting the game through its development, and really, really enthusiastic about what Digital Eclipse was doing to bring this game to life for modern gamers. So being able to release this soundtrack through Bandcamp and Spotify and free for everybody really was just something that excited us, and I think it's amazing to be able to do that. This is a first for me as a composer in the video game industry to have an official soundtrack available for free to the community, and it's really cool to me to see how much gratitude and happiness that the players have had for just being able to just go grab it and bring it into their other kinds of role-playing experiences, and like tabletop role-playing, because Wizardry is such an iconic RPG experience. Having the music from it applicable to other sorts of larger TTRPG experiences and in different kinds of storytelling is really neat. It's really cool. I've enjoyed that very much, so it's been exciting for me.
So now that the Wizardry remake is out there, what game is Winifred working on next? Well, that information is under wraps. But for now, she's out spreading the word about Wizardry and working to help other video game composers of all experience out there hone their craft.
Of course, my website, winifredphillips.com, but I'm also on Twitter at WinPhillips. That's WinPhillips. I share a lot about what I'm doing. I have a monthly blog in which I talk about the process of being a game composer. I discuss different techniques for aspiring game composers so that we can kind of connect with each other as a community. And I wrote the book, A Composer's Guide to Game Music from the MIT Press. So that kind of connects with the monthly blog. So we sort of all kind of share in a common knowledge base, and then we kind of grow with it. So it's been really cool to interface with everybody, and so that we are kind of all growing and experimenting as audio creators in the game industry.
Thanks once again to Winifred for sitting down to talk to me about the Wizardry remake and its amazing soundtrack. I absolutely love the remake. It gets a high recommendation from me, so go check it out if you haven't yet. I want to give an extra special thanks to my Patreon and Ko-Fi supporters. They got to see this video early and get exclusive access to the full interview with Winifred, which includes a deeper look into her process for composing Wizardry soundtrack, her thoughts on the similarities between composing for video games and radio plays, and a lot more. Patreon supporters get access to even more interviews and the Crawl Discord server, plus free copies of my games. Check out the description box below for links and more information about all of that. For now, though, that's going to do it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again soon.